I stood frozen in the bank's lobby, clutching the printout of transactions I never made. My brother Connor's familiar signature stared back at me, mocking my trust with every fraudulent stroke of his pen. How long had he been planning this betrayal? How many more secrets was he keeping from the person who'd spent her whole life protecting him? The financial advisor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Miss Delaney, I understand this is difficult, but we need to know how you'd like to proceed. I traced my finger over Connor's forged signature again, the ink smudging slightly beneath my trembling touch. 3 credit cards, 2 personal loans, and a mortgage application, all in my name, all without my knowledge. $68,000 of debt that wasn't mine to bear. Miss Delaney, the advisor prompted again. I looked up, my decision crystallizing with cold clarity. I'd like to report identity theft, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I want to press charges. The advisor's eyes widened slightly. Against your brother? Are you certain that's? Completely certain, I interrupted. But first, I need you to help me set something up. My name is Phoebe Delaney, and for 29 years I'd been the responsible one. The one who made sure the bills were paid, who canceled our father's credit cards after he died, who put her own dreams on hold to take care of everyone else. The one who'd raised Connor after our mother walked out, leaving me, barely 18, to become both sister and parent to a troubled 11-year-old boy. Now I was about to teach my brother the hardest lesson of his life. And I wasn't going to let anyone talk me out of it. When I arrived home, I found Connor sprawled on my couch, controller in hand, playing a video game on my TV. The remains of a pizza sat on my coffee table, a coffee table I'd saved for months to buy. He hadn't even used a plate. Hey, Phoebes, he called without looking up. Where've you been? I ordered dinner but couldn't wait. There's like 2 slices left. I stood in the doorway, studying him. My brother was handsome in that effortless way that had always made life too easy for him, sandy hair falling across his forehead, our father's chiseled jaw, our mother's expressive eyes. At 22, he still carried himself with the carefree confidence of someone who believed the world would always make exceptions for him. Because it always had. Because I had always made sure it did. Connor, I said quietly. We need to talk. Can it wait? I'm about to beat this level. I walked over and turned off the TV. Hey! He looked up, annoyed, then frowned when he saw my expression. What's wrong? Did something happen? I sat down across from him, placing my bag between us like a barrier. I went to the bank today. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a momentary tightening around the mouth, a subtle shift in his posture. If I hadn't spent my life reading his tells, I might have missed it. Yeah. What for? He kept his tone casual. I was applying for a loan to finally finish my degree, I said, watching him carefully. Imagine my surprise when they told me I already had too much debt to qualify. Connor's fingers twitched against the controller. That's weird. Must be some kind of mistake. That's what I thought too. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of papers. So they printed this out for me. Want to explain why your signature is on loans I never took out? For a moment, he sat perfectly still, his face a blank mask. Then, as practiced as a professional actor, his expression melted into wounded innocence. Phoebes, I can explain. Don't, I cut him off. Don't lie to me. Not again. He set the controller down, running a hand through his hair, another tell. It's not what you think. I was going to pay it all back before you even found out. With what money, Connor? You don't even have a job. I did have one. At Ryan's uncle's place, remember? But then the startup thing came along, and it's going to be huge, Phoebe. Like, seriously life-changing. I just needed some capital to get in on the ground floor. I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. So you committed felony identity theft? Against me? Don't be so dramatic, he scoffed. It's not identity theft when it's family. I was going to pay it all back with interest. That's not how the law works, Connor. That's not how anything works. He leaned forward, his eyes earnest in that way that had always melted my resolve. Look, I know I should have asked, but you would have said no, and this opportunity was too good to pass up. Ryan's cousin is connected to this tech billionaire, and... Stop, I said, holding up my hand. Just stop. I don't want to hear about Ryan or his cousin or some mystery billionaire. I want you to tell me exactly how much you took and where it went. He blinked, looking genuinely confused. I told you, it went into the startup. All 68,000? His eyes widened slightly. Had he lost track of how much he'd stolen? Or had he not realized I knew the full amount? Well, most of it, he hedged. There were some expenses. What kind of expenses? He gestured vaguely. You know, networking dinners, some gear I needed to look the part. Investor stuff. I thought about the designer watch on his wrist, the new laptop I'd noticed last week, the weekend trip with friends he'd taken to Vegas. All while I worked double shifts and ate ramen to save for a degree I'd been postponing for years. I want it back, I said. All of it. By the end of the month. He laughed, actually laughed. That's not possible, Phoebes. But look, the startup's launching soon, and then I'll be able to pay everything off. Just give me a little time. You don't have time, I said, my voice flat. The bank is already investigating. They're talking about pressing charges. That got his attention. What? Why did you tell them? This is between us. You can just tell them you authorized the loans. And commit fraud myself? No, Connor. Panic flickered across his face. Phoebe, you can't do this to me. I'll go to jail. A part of me, a small, hurt part that was still the 18-year-old girl who'd had to grow up too fast, whispered, good. But I pushed it down. There's another option, I said. The bank manager suggested we could have a meeting tomorrow. You, me, him, and their fraud specialist. If you come clean and agree to a repayment plan, they might be willing to work with us. Relief washed over his face. Yes, of course. Whatever it takes. I nodded, gathering up the papers. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't be late. As I stood up, Connor grabbed my hand. Thank you, Phoebes. I know I messed up, but I promise I'll fix this. You're the best sister anyone could ask for. His words were so sincere, his gratitude so palpable, that for a moment I almost wavered. Almost. But then I remembered the cold dread in my stomach when the bank manager had shown me those papers. The humiliation of being denied a loan because my own brother had stolen my financial future. Tomorrow at 10, I repeated, pulling my hand away. And Connor? Find somewhere else to stay tonight. The hurt in his eyes should have made me feel guilty. Instead, it only strengthened my resolve. Because the meeting I'd arranged at the bank tomorrow wasn't what he thought it was. Not even close. I barely slept that night, twisting in sheets that suddenly felt too confining. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Connor's face, not as the grown man who'd betrayed me, but as the frightened 11-year-old boy who'd clung to me the day our mother left, begging me not to abandon him too. "You'll take care of me, right, Phoebes?" he'd asked, tears streaming down his freckled cheeks. "Always," I'd promised. No matter what. But I'd never imagined what would include this. At 9:45 the next morning, I walked into Riverdale Community Bank, my steps faltering slightly as I approached the ornate desk where Mr. Hargrove, the branch manager, waited with a somber expression. "Miss Delaney," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Everything is arranged as you requested. Detective Spencer is already here, and our fraud specialist is joining us as well." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Thank you. My brother should be here soon. Are you sure you want to proceed this way?" Mr. Hargrove's voice was gentle. "There are less confrontational options we could explore." I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for Connor. All the less confrontational options that had only enabled his behavior. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "He needs to understand the consequences of his actions." Mr. Hargrove nodded, leading me to a conference room where a stern-faced woman in a pantsuit and a uniformed police officer were already seated. They introduced themselves as Ms. Rodriguez, the bank's fraud specialist, and Detective Spencer. "Miss Delaney," Detective Spencer said, his voice professional but kind. "I understand this is a difficult situation. Family fraud cases are always complicated. Will you really need to arrest him?" I asked, the reality of what I'd set in motion suddenly hitting me full force. Detective Spencer exchanged a glance with Ms. Rodriguez. "That depends on how the conversation goes and whether your brother is willing to cooperate. But I won't lie to you, identity theft is a serious crime, regardless of the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim." Victim. The word hung in the air between us, uncomfortable in its accuracy. A knock at the door interrupted us. Mr. Hargrove opened it to reveal Connor, looking uncharacteristically polished in the one suit he owned, the one I'd bought him for job interviews he rarely bothered to attend. "Sorry I'm late," he said, flashing his most charming smile. "Traffic was a nightmare." His smile faltered when he noticed Detective Spencer. "What's going on?" "I thought this was just a meeting with the bank manager." "Please sit down, Mr. Delaney," Mr. Hargrove said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. Connor complied, darting nervous glances between the professionals and me. "Phoebe? What is this?" "Mr. Delaney," Ms. Rodriguez began, "we've uncovered evidence of extensive identity theft and fraud carried out against your sister. Multiple credit accounts were opened using her personal information but bearing your signature. Can you explain that?" Connor's charming facade cracked. He looked at me, betrayal written across his features. "You said they would work with us if I came clean. You didn't say anything about the police." "I said the bank suggested a meeting," I corrected quietly. "I never promised there wouldn't be consequences." "Miss Delaney provided us with these documents yesterday," Ms. Rodriguez continued, sliding copies of the loan applications toward Connor. "Can you confirm whether these signatures are yours?" Connor ignored her, his eyes locked on mine. "How could you do this to me? After everything we've been through?" "I'm your brother." "And I'm your sister," I replied, my voice breaking slightly. "That didn't stop you from stealing my identity and putting me thousands of dollars in debt." "I was going to pay it back," he shouted. "The startup is real, Phoebe. Ryan's cousin." "There is no startup, Connor," I interrupted. "I called Ryan yesterday. He has no idea what you're talking about. There's no tech billionaire, no investment opportunity. It was all a lie." Connor's face paled. For a moment, he looked so young, so vulnerable, that my resolve almost faltered again. Almost. Mr. Delaney, Detective Spencer said, his voice firm but not unkind. I'd advise you to answer Ms. Rodriguez's question. Are these your signatures? Connor's shoulders slumped. Yes, he admitted quietly. But Phoebe, you have to believe me. I really thought I could make the money back. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't believe that. What did you spend it on? I asked, the question that had been burning inside me since yesterday. The truth this time. He couldn't meet my eyes. Some of it was for the apartment in Westwood. What apartment? The one I've been staying at, when I'm not at your place. I stared at him, stunned. You have your own apartment? All this time I thought you were couch surfing with friends when you weren't with me. He shrugged, a hint of his usual nonchalance returning. It's a nice place. I needed somewhere impressive to bring dates back to. And the rest of the money? He shifted uncomfortably. The usual stuff. Clothes, going out, some investments. Gambling, Ms. Rodriguez interrupted, sliding another document across the table. Our fraud team found numerous transfers to online casinos from the credit cards opened in your sister's name. I felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Gambling. The one thing our father had warned us against his entire life, the addiction that had cost him his marriage, his home, and ultimately contributed to his early death. Connor, I whispered. Tell me that's not true. But the shame on his face told me everything. It started small, he said, his voice barely audible. Just a few bets here and there. But then I got in a hole, and I needed money to get out. I was going to win it all back, Phoebes, I swear. Just like our father had sworn to our mother, time and time again. Miss Delaney, Detective Spencer said gently. Given the evidence, we have grounds to arrest your brother for identity theft, fraud, and financial exploitation. However, as I mentioned, in family cases, we sometimes have options. If you're willing to work with the prosecutor's office, there might be an alternative arrangement that includes restitution and mandatory counseling. I looked at Connor, really looked at him. Past the charm and the excuses, past the little boy I'd raised and the man he'd become, what I saw broke my heart. He was spiraling down the same destructive path our father had taken. And I had helped him get there, with every time I'd bailed him out, every consequence I'd shielded him from. What would that entail? I asked the detective. A formal admission of guilt, Detective Spencer explained. A structured repayment plan. Gambling addiction counseling. Possibly probation instead of jail time, depending on the judge. But Miss Delaney, I need to be clear, this would still result in a criminal record. And if your brother violates the terms of any agreement, he would face the full consequences of his actions. Connor looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Phoebe, please. I'll do anything. Just don't let them take me to jail today. It was the same plea he'd made at 17 when I'd bailed him out after a shoplifting incident. The same one at 19 when he'd wrecked my car and needed me to lie to the insurance company. The same pattern, over and over. I need a moment alone with my brother, I said. The others exchanged glances, then nodded. We'll be right outside, Mr. Hargrove said, ushering everyone out of the room. When the door closed, Connor immediately launched into his defense. Phoebe, I swear on Dad's grave, I'll pay back every penny. I'll get help. I'll. Stop, I said, holding up my hand. For once in your life, just stop and listen. He fell silent, watching me nervously. I love you, Connor. You're my brother, and I have done everything in my power to take care of you since we were kids. I've sacrificed my education, my social life, my financial security, all to make sure you had what you needed. I know, and I'm grateful. Let me finish, I interrupted. I've been enabling you. For years, I've been so afraid of failing you that I never let you experience the natural consequences of your actions. And now look where we are. He had the decency to look ashamed. I can help you through this, I continued. But I won't fix it for you. Not this time. You're going to admit what you did, all of it. You're going to agree to their terms. You're going to pay back every cent you took from me, even if it takes years. And you're going to get help for your gambling. Real help. I will, Phoebes. I promise. And there's one more condition, I said, my voice hardening. You move out of that apartment today. You sell whatever luxury items you bought with my money. And you find a real job, not some get-rich-quick scheme, not some opportunity from a friend, a real, steady job. Where am I supposed to live? He asked, a hint of his usual entitlement creeping back into his voice. That's not my problem anymore, I said, the words painful but necessary. You're 22 years old, Connor. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. His face crumpled. You're throwing me out? After everything we've been through? No, I corrected him, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. I'm stepping aside so you can finally grow up. I stood and walked to the door. I'll tell them we're ready now. Phoebe, wait, Connor called, real fear in his voice. What if I can't do this? What if I fail? I turned back to him, suddenly seeing both versions of my brother at once, the frightened child he'd been and the troubled man he'd become. Then you'll pick yourself up and try again, I said softly. Like I've had to do every time life knocked me down. Like adults are supposed to do. When I opened the door, Detective Spencer was waiting. Miss Delaney? Have you reached a decision? I nodded. My brother is ready to take responsibility for his actions, I said. And so am I. As they led Connor away to begin the formal process, he looked back at me one last time, a mixture of fear and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of genuine remorse, in his eyes. I'm sorry, Phoebe, he said. For everything. I know, I replied. But this time, sorry isn't enough. I watched as they disappeared down the hallway, the weight of the past 29 years somehow both heavier and lighter on my shoulders. This was love too, I realized. A harder, more honest kind than what I'd been offering before. And as painful as it was the kind we both needed. In the weeks that followed Connor's confession, I moved through my days in a fog of guilt and uncertainty. Had I done the right thing? Would he forgive me? Would I forgive myself? The prosecutor had agreed to a deferred prosecution arrangement. If Connor completed 2 years of probation, paid full restitution, and attended mandatory gambling addiction counseling, the charges would be reduced. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't jail either. I hadn't heard from him since that day at the bank. According to his probation officer, he was staying at a halfway house and had found work at a warehouse. Part of me wanted to check on him, to make sure he was eating properly, to slip him some extra cash for necessities. But I knew that would only undermine everything I was trying to accomplish. So instead, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I met with a financial counselor to create a recovery plan for my credit. I applied for a smaller student loan, just enough to take 2 classes per semester while I continued working. I even went on a date with Michael, the kind barista who'd been asking me out for months, always patient when I claimed to be too busy. But the shadow of Connor's betrayal and my response to it still hung over me. Had I been too harsh? Not harsh enough? Was I really helping him, or just punishing him for hurting me? These questions swirled through my mind as I sat in Professor Lambert's evening literature class, barely hearing her lecture on symbols in Greek mythology. Miss Delaney? I looked up, startled to find Professor Lambert standing right in front of my desk, an expectant expression on her face. "I'm sorry," I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "Could you repeat the question?" A few students snickered, but Professor Lambert just smiled patiently. "I asked what you thought about Daedalus's dilemma, whether he was responsible for his son's fall." I blinked, struggling to recall the details of the myth. "You mean Icarus? Who flew too close to the sun?" She nodded. Daedalus created the wings that let him and his son escape their prison. He warned Icarus not to fly too high or too low. But ultimately, it was Icarus who chose to ignore his father's advice. So where does responsibility lie? With the father who created the means of both escape and potential destruction? Or with the son who misused his father's gift? The parallel to my own situation with Connor struck me with such force that for a moment, I couldn't speak. I began hesitantly. "I think maybe it's both." Daedalus created a dangerous tool and entrusted it to someone who wasn't ready for the responsibility. Icarus made his own choices, but he was also set up to fail. Professor Lambert studied me curiously. "An interesting perspective, Miss Delaney. Most students tend to place the blame squarely on either the father or the son. But you see it as a shared responsibility." She moved back to the front of the classroom. "Which raises another question: if Daedalus could go back, knowing what would happen, would he make the wings differently? Or would he simply never give them to his son at all?" The question followed me home that night, spinning through my mind as I made dinner in my suddenly too quiet apartment. Had I been like Daedalus, giving Connor the tools for his own destruction, the money, the bailouts, the endless second chances? Or was I more like Icarus's prison guards, now trying to place limits on someone who just wanted to be free? 3 days later, as I was leaving work, I saw a familiar figure waiting by my car. Connor looked thinner, his normally styled hair now cropped short, his designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a worn flannel shirt. "Hey, Phoebes," he said, his voice uncertain. I stopped a few feet away, my keys clutched in my hand. "Connor. What are you doing here?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "My counselor thought it would be good for me to talk to you. Part of the whole making amends thing." He gestured vaguely. "But I can go if you don't want to see me." I hesitated, then unlocked my car. "Get in. We can talk at the coffee shop down the street." We drove in awkward silence, neither of us quite knowing how to bridge the gulf that had opened between us. At the coffee shop, I ordered my usual latte while Connor just asked for water. "You're not drinking coffee anymore?" I asked as we settled at a corner table. He shook his head. "Trying to save money. And caffeine apparently makes the gambling urges worse. At least that's what they say in the meetings." "The meetings are helping then?" "Yeah, actually. They are." He took a sip of water. "Turns out Dad was going to them too, toward the end." "Did you know that?" I shook my head. "No, I had no idea. He kept it secret. Like everything else." Connor's voice grew bitter. "I always thought he was so weak, you know? For letting gambling ruin his life. For letting Mom leave. I swore I'd never be like him. And now?" He met my eyes for the first time since he'd gotten into my car. Now I understand him better. How it starts small. How you convince yourself you're in control. How easy it is to cross lines you swore you never would. He ran a hand over his short hair. I actually looked up to him for hiding it so well. How messed up is that? I thought about our father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and help Connor with his homework, the same man who'd emptied our college funds to cover his gambling debts. He tried, I said softly. In his own way. Like you tried with me? Connor asked. Before I screwed it all up? I looked down at my latte. I made mistakes too, Connor. I shouldn't have enabled you for so long. I shouldn't have made it so easy for you to avoid consequences. That's what my counselor says, he admitted. That you were an enabler. But Phoebes, that doesn't make what I did okay. I knew exactly what I was doing when I took out those loans in your name. I knew it would hurt you, and I did it anyway. His honesty caught me off guard. There was none of the usual charm, none of the practiced excuses or deflections. Just raw, uncomfortable truth. Why did you do it? I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks. Really? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I could, he finally said. Because you'd always fixed everything before, so I thought you'd fix this too. Because I was desperate and selfish and, his voice cracked. Because I've been taking advantage of your love my whole life. Tears pricked at my eyes. Connor. No, let me finish, he insisted. I've been in therapy 5 days a week, Phoebes. Group sessions, individual counseling, financial management classes. And you know what they all say? That I've been using you as a human safety net. That I never grew up because I never had to. I thought about all the times I'd put his needs before my own. All the dreams I'd deferred to make sure he had what he needed. I was afraid, I admitted. After Mom left, I was terrified of failing you like she failed us. Like Dad failed us. I thought if I just loved you enough, protected you enough, you wouldn't end up like him. But that's the thing, Connor said. I did end up like him anyway. And now I need to figure out how to be better. Not for you, not for Mom or Dad's memory. For me. I studied his face, trying to see past the familiar features to the person he was becoming. Are you really going to stick with it this time? The counseling, the job, all of it? He nodded. I don't have a choice. There's no one to bail me out anymore. And honestly, that's probably what I've needed all along. We talked for another hour, really talked, without the usual layers of deception and performance that had defined our relationship for so long. He told me about his job at the warehouse, about the little studio apartment he was saving up for, about the shame he still felt every time he thought about what he'd done to me. I want to pay you back, he said firmly. Every cent. I know the court ordered it, but I need you to know I would do it even if they hadn't. I believe you, I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. As we were getting ready to leave, Connor hesitated. Can I ask you something? And promise you'll be honest. Of course. Do you regret it? Turning me in? I thought about it carefully. I regret that it came to that, I said finally. I regret that I let things go so far. But no, I don't regret holding you accountable. You needed it. We both did. He nodded, a mixture of sadness and understanding crossing his face. I thought you would hate me. After what I did. I was angry, I admitted. Furious, actually. But I could never hate you, Connor. You're my brother. Even after everything? Even after everything. We stepped outside, the the evening air cool against my skin. "Do you need a ride back to the halfway house?" I asked. He shook his head. "I've got the bus." Part of this whole independence thing, figuring out public transportation. He smiled ruefully. "Never thought I'd miss your nagging about being late for curfew." I smiled back. Never thought I'd miss having someone to nag. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure how to say goodbye. Finally, Connor stepped forward and hugged me, a quick, almost shy embrace. "Thanks for seeing me," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Anytime," I replied. "Just, maybe call first next time? Instead of ambushing me at my car?" He laughed, a genuine laugh, not the practiced charm he usually employed. "Deal." As I watched him walk toward the bus stop, shoulders straighter than I'd seen them in years, I thought about Professor Lambert's question again. If Daedalus could go back, knowing what would happen, would he make the wings differently? Or would he simply never give them to his son at all? Maybe the answer wasn't either of those options. Maybe, just maybe, Daedalus would help his son learn to fly on his own, without artificial wings that could melt when tested, but with his own strength and wisdom, hard-earned through trial and error, and maybe Icarus would fall a few times anyway. But eventually, he might learn to soar. 6 months later, I stood nervously in the registrar's office at Westfield Community College, waiting for confirmation that my transfer credits had been accepted. After 2 semesters of part-time classes, I'd finally decided to commit to finishing my degree in business administration. "Everything looks in order, Miss Delaney," the registrar said, smiling as she handed me my course schedule. "You're all set for the fall semester." "Full-time status." "Full-time." The words sent a thrill of excitement and anxiety through me. I hadn't been a full-time student since I was 18, before our father died, before Connor became my responsibility. As I stepped out into the bright summer sunshine, I pulled out my phone to share the news with Michael. We'd been dating for 4 months now, his quiet steadiness a balm to my frayed nerves. He understood what I was going through with Connor. His own brother had struggled with addiction, and never pushed me to move faster than I was ready for. But before I could dial, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Connor. "Hey," I answered, trying to keep the worry from my voice. We spoke regularly now, but unscheduled calls still triggered my anxiety. "Everything okay?" "Everything's great, actually," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I got promoted at work. Assistant shift manager. It comes with a $1 raise and better hours." "Connor, that's amazing," I said, genuinely thrilled for him. "I'm so proud of you." "Yeah, well, turns out I'm pretty good at organizing shipments." "Who knew?" He chuckled. "Anyway, I was wondering if you wanted to grab dinner tonight?" "My treat. I got my first paycheck with the raise today." "I'd love to," I said. "Actually, I have some news to share too." "Good news or bad news?" he asked, a hint of his old wariness creeping in. "Good," I assured him. "Really good." We agreed to meet at a modest Italian restaurant halfway between my apartment and his new place, a tiny studio in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy but his own space, paid for with honest work. When I arrived, Connor was already waiting, dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, his hair neatly combed. He still wasn't back to the designer clothes and perfectly styled look he'd cultivated before, but there was a different kind of confidence about him now, quieter, more authentic. "You look good," I said as I sat down across from him. "Thanks. You too." He smiled. "Happy, I mean. You look happy." "I am," I admitted. Most days, anyway. We ordered, and as we waited for our food, Connor filled me in on his new responsibilities at work, his ongoing counseling sessions, and his recent decision to take a computer course at the local library. The warehouse is fine for now, he explained, but I want to have more options eventually. Maybe something in inventory management or logistics. That's fantastic, I said, genuinely impressed by how much thought he'd put into it. I always knew you were smart. You just needed to apply yourself. He rolled his eyes. Okay, Mom. Sorry, I laughed. Old habits die hard. Speaking of which, he said, reaching into his pocket, I have something for you. He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was a check for $3,000, the largest payment he'd made yet toward his restitution. Connor, I breathed. This is a lot. Are you sure you can afford it? I've been saving, he said proudly. Living below my means. Turns out I don't actually need designer clothes or fancy electronics to be happy. He shrugged. Who knew? I laughed, but I was touched by the gesture. This will really help with my tuition. Your tuition? He asked. What's going on? I shared my news about going back to school full-time, watching as his face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Phoebes, that's incredible. You're finally going to get your degree. That's the plan, I said. It's a little scary, cutting back my hours at work, but with the financial aid package and some careful budgeting, I think I can make it work. You will, he said confidently. You've always been the smart one. We're both smart, I corrected him. Just in different ways. Our food arrived, and as we ate, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't been able to around Connor in years. There were no eggshells to walk on, no lies to untangle, no disasters to manage. Just two adults sharing a meal and genuine conversation. Can I ask you something? Connor said as we finished our entrees, his fork pushing around the remains of his pasta. The restaurant's ambient lighting softened the new lines on his face, lines earned through difficulty and growth rather than age. Of course, I said, folding my napkin beside my plate, giving him my full attention. He met my eyes, vulnerability visible in his gaze. Do you think Dad would be disappointed in me? For what I did to you? The question hung between us, weighted with family history and shared pain. I considered my answer carefully, wanting to honor both truth and healing. I think, I began slowly, he would have recognized himself in your mistakes. And I think that would have broken his heart. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. But I also think he would be incredibly proud of what you're doing now. Taking responsibility. Making amends. Breaking the cycle. Connor nodded, a sheen of tears brightening his eyes before he blinked them away. Sometimes I wonder if genetics are destiny, you know? If I was always going to end up with his demons. We all inherit things from our parents, I said. Good and bad. But what matters is what we choose to do with that inheritance. He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. When did you get so wise, Phoebes? Probably around the time I stopped trying to protect you from your own life, I replied, with a small, sad smile of my own. As we split a tiramisu for dessert, I realized something profound had shifted between us. The dynamics that had defined our relationship for decades, caretaker and dependent, enabler and enabled, had been dismantled and rebuilt into something healthier. Something closer to equals. We weren't fully healed, there were still awkward pauses in conversation, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But we were healing. Both of us. Together and separately. As we walked to our cars, Connor stopped suddenly. I meant to tell you, I'm thinking about going back to school too. Just one night class to start. Business math. The coincidence made me laugh. Look at us. The Delaney siblings, hitting the books again. Better late than never, right? He said, jingling his keys. Better late than never indeed.